This is the Mainframe Connect podcast, brought to you by the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project. Sponsored by Phoenix Software International and by Infinity, a Converge company. Mainframe Connect includes the I Am A Mainframer series, the riveting Mainframe Voices series, and other content exploring relevant topics with mainframe professionals and offering insights into the industry and technology. Today's episode is another in the I Am A Mainframer series, exploring the career journeys of mainframe professionals.
Hello and welcome. My name's Steven Dickens, and you're joining us here for another episode of the I Am A Mainframer podcast. I'm going to say I'm joined by Emma from Danske Bank. I'm not going to butcher the surname. We were just talking about it off camera. So, Emma, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers here.
Yeah, so I'm Emma. I work as an IT security engineer for Danske Bank, as Steven just said. I also do a lot of other stuff. I can't help myself getting involved in stuff I have no business in. I'm also part of open source projects like SIA, Security API for RegF. And I also have some own personal projects on the side. And I create a bunch of LinkedIn articles, share my knowledge, and get my viewpoints across, because I do think it's important that we have a discussion about which direction the industry should head in, because we can't just freeze things in time.
So, Emma, I've been looking forward to this episode because you've popped up in my comments and I've popped up in your comments. So let's go there first. This is a pretty free format show. Tell me a little bit around, let's just pull on some of the threads. You talked about open source, talked about framing where the industry's going. Love your perspective on the mainframe. There's a little bit of spice in there. There's a little bit of sort of pulling at threads. Absolutely behind what you're doing, because I think those types of poking the bear, I want to say a little bit, is all goodness. We need to do that. We need to be doing that in this industry. So maybe just double click a little and we'll go round this for a few minutes. You mentioned some things in the introduction. Just double click, reframing the industry. I see your perspectives. If you're not following Emma on LinkedIn, fix that now. Here's a pause for 5 seconds. Go look her up on LinkedIn. Give her a follow request. She's fantastic. But just maybe expand on that for the listeners and the viewers here. And we'll go there for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about everything, both technical posts and more theoretical posts, about what kind of principles we should adopt. I have a tendency in general, both at work and on LinkedIn, to get into very specific solutions. But we also need to talk about how we do things, because that also influences the reason why I talk about the very nitty-gritty technical stuff. Like right now, that's my experience and impression from talking to other people. So the industry is a lot of manual processes. We do have some automation, but that's on a very low level. I feel like we have a lot of people going in there, setting up security definitions by themselves, copying stuff they have from requests and emails, like very manual processes. And that's the exact opposite of what you see on other platforms. There's a tendency on other platforms to automate as much as possible. Mm-hmm. I do think that actually makes sense. There's kind of a distrust in automation in our field, but I feel like that's misguided, because it doesn't mean like that someone can just ask for something and they immediately get it on the system. You can still have approval workflows, and you might go like, oh, what's the point of doing all this automation and all these processes if you're still going to have human oversight? But it's also about eliminating that manual data entry, because mistakes can happen in that process, and it's slow to have people type in stuff on the system. So I really want us to adopt automation and infrastructure as code, if that makes sense.
I'm thinking back now to some of your sort of posts. You're really pulling on the threads, I think, of some of the fundamentals of how ZOS, sysprog, and security is kind of there's a body of 50, 60 years worth of experience. And what I love about your content is you're kind of pulling and challenging in a constructive way. It's not like this is broken, everybody look at how this is broken. None of your posts look at that. This is how I think we could make this better. And that's the productive element for me in the community.
Yeah, it's not about coming in here and saying like, oh, that's an old server we need to shove into a closet and disconnect from power. It's not about that. I almost had people be like, oh, you hate servers, and it's like, no, I don't hate it. I actually see a lot of potential in it.
You love it so much that you're able to get the feedback. I mean, I cut across you there, but I think that's how it feels to me when I read your content.
Yeah.
You're so enamored by this platform that you want it to be better. Am I catching that right? I mean, it's the first time we've had this conversation. I'm just working on 6-9 months worth of watching you on LinkedIn. That's what's fascinating to me.
I have this perspective that if you love something, you should criticize it. Like, if we want this platform to die, we should neglect it and freeze it in time. That's how you kill something, in my opinion. If you look at technology that has gone by the wayside, it's because people are like, this is great, we never need to change. Everything is fine as is, and I don't want this to happen to this platform. And it's kind of a miracle we haven't already gotten there, and we need to avoid that. So we need to act now. That's kind of what I want people to take away from my post. We need to get out and do stuff.
Well, I think just that's a natural segue. You talked about your involvement in open source in the introduction. Maybe let's go there for a little bit. Talk about what you're doing in the open source community. We're on the Open Mainframe Project podcast. Tell us what you're doing and how somebody who feels the way you obviously feel about this platform can actually get involved. Because I think there's a bunch of people who actively feel the way that you do, but there's the how do you move that to action? And I think what's come across from my interactions with you online has been you've moved that to action. So maybe just explain that for a little while about what that means.
Yeah, I kind of got involved in the whole open source sphere because I was kind of frustrated with the pace of how stuff was moving. I eventually came to the conclusion, okay, we can't just wait for all these great vendors to release stuff. We actually need to do stuff ourselves, and also so we can leave our mark on things, because if we wait for a company to deliver it, they might have some feedback rounds or whatever, but it's probably going to be late in the process. And by that time, there's stuff that's too late to change. That's just the reality of software. You don't throw everything away 24 months into a project. So getting involved in these open source projects, creating something and throwing it on the internet so others can contribute to it and pick it apart and learn from it, that's very valuable. At this point, I often go into the code of projects to read it. And initially, that's a very hard thing to do, but as you do it more, it'll start to make sense, honestly.
So talk about, you mentioned about a particular sort of project that you were working on and contributing to. Maybe you can double click there for us a moment.
Yeah, so I got involved in this project that was initially started by IBM. Back then it was under the name RegFu. It was the security API for regf. Eventually, IBM, for whatever reason, I never got hands on this, but they shut down the project. But all the code was there, and I had already done a few minor contributions to it. So along with another community member, we were just like, let's pick this up because we think this is so great. It shouldn't be allowed to die. And that's also a great thing about open source. No one can really kill anything. If there's people working on it, it's alive. You can...
If it's got code velocity and it's got contributions, then it's default alive. So is that and this is on me, is that part of the Open Mainframe project? Have you brought it through the TAC function and trying to get it?
Not currently, no.
That's something you should do. That's something you should do. But so, I mean, that's the value of the Open Mainframe project, bringing it to a bigger audience, bringing it through. We can have this conversation offline, but connecting you to the technical advisory committee and getting you promoted through as a project, that's absolutely something the project. This is for me the fundamentals of open source. And we're still having this. I literally recorded a podcast this week. Sorry, it was a press interview. Correction, it was a press interview for a piece that's coming out. We've come to the 10th anniversary of the Open Mainframe project. It was August 17th, 2015. We're still trying to build this muscle around open source on the mainframe. We've been doing it for 10 years, so he's been, I think, 5 of those years. But how do we build this muscle? So we'll definitely have that conversation offline. But I think for me, there's a lot encapsulated in what you said of deep in sort of engagement with the platform, willing to pick up code, willing to contribute. I think there's a lot in there for the listeners. So tell me a little bit about, well, spend a bit of time on your career. How did you get here? You're working for one of the biggest banks in Europe. I'm assuming you're working in the mainframe team, given what you're doing.
Yes.
How did you get from college or even high school, if you didn't go to college? That's an assumption on my behalf. How did you get from kind of school to where you are running sort of a large part of security for a big sort of global bank?
Yeah, I had a really weird path, honestly. Let's go even further back than I usually, because I get this question quite often. One part of the story I haven't really covered much. I actually started working with, I guess, tech as a concept, or like tinkering with tech as a concept, all the way back when I was a kid. I was like tinkering around with like coding little dumb video games in scripting languages and stuff. So that's kind of like how I got into this, and this still kind of affects how I view things, because I have worked on other platforms than the mainframe, even if it's not in a professional capacity. So I do actually quite like both platforms. You sometimes see some animosity towards that, but yeah, when I after I finished high school, it seemed natural for me to get into tech. I'd spent all these years like tinkering with this in my own free time as a teenager. So I went to this trade school because I had horrible grades when I was in high school. Like my grades were not very good, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll go to trade school, because we have a local trade school, or vocational school, I think it would be called in English actually, but does have some IT stuff. So I went there, and part of that whole course, I guess, was that you also had to get an apprenticeship working for a company. So I applied a ton of places, and there weren't really any places really interested in hiring me, which was very discouraging. Eventually, I did actually get an interview with an insurance company, and initially they rejected me, but then I went on to LinkedIn because they had mentioned during the interview that they had a mainframe. I went on to LinkedIn and messaged one of the people from the interview, like asking them about the mainframe, because I started looking this thing up after the interview, and I was like, these still exist. That looks interesting. I can't help myself when I hear about weird tech. It's all very interesting to me. So I actually messaged him, asking tons of questions about what they run. He mentioned COBOL, some other stuff. So I started learning this stuff, and eventually they actually called me back and were like, okay, we're actually interested in you anyway. So they brought me in for a second interview, and I ended up getting an apprenticeship. Then I got my, I guess, launch on the mainframe band, worked there for a while, and then I wanted to work in a big environment, so I moved on to the bank I work for now.
That's just a fascinating story. I mean, round of applause for you, Emma. That not great grades at school based on what you said, technical college, hustled to get the internship, and now you're working for one of the biggest global banks. I mean, we just need to pause and say just well done. You probably don't hear that enough. So I want to speak for the audience and say that. So I just want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything you think we'll get to the other questions, but I want to sort of give you a few minutes to just self-guide. What else do you think you should be sharing with the audience here? The downside of me is we get thrown together. We don't have a huge team to do background and do research, and I'm just mid-conversation, just genuinely fascinated about your story, how you're engaging online, how you're getting involved in open source. So just maybe freestyle yourself. What else do you want to share with the listeners and viewers? Because I don't want to get to the end of this and me have directed you and you go, I wish I could have talked about this. I think there's an opportunity. I think just such a fascinating conversation for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I always had trouble doing my homework in school. I would rather just do whatever I wanted to do. I would sometimes sit with my laptop in school because it was at the time in schools where laptops were starting to make it in. So the teacher would talk about stuff and they thought I was taking notes, but I was really just sitting there programming on my laptop, doing anything but what I was supposed to do. And it's I wouldn't recommend kids just completely disregard their teachers, obviously, but it's if you are driven enough and you are really determined to learn something and be the best and really self-learn and experiment, you can actually do a lot of things in life. I even dropped out of that technical school earlier, so my highest educational level is technically high school. But I mean, it's not affecting me in my work. I do a lot of things really well. I've even gotten to the point where I'm training new people, giving them tasks, reviewing their work. So it's you don't necessarily need to hire all these highly educated university people, and I have nothing against them or anything, but it's you can get talent from a wide range of backgrounds, and I think it's really useful to have that diverse set of people.
Well, I mean, a dear friend of mine is a gentleman called Mark Wilson. If you're not connected with Mark, I will absolutely fix that, because given your security space, Mark Wilson is absolutely somebody you should know in the mainframe community. Mark finished high school age 16, and he is probably renowned as the best mainframe white hat hacker in the business. Built 2 businesses. One of them was acquired by BMC. Runs the GSE conference, or has done now. His daughter's picked it up for a number of years and built that technical community. Literally a rock star. And I think your story and his have got a lot of parallels of, it's not about the academic qualifications, it's about that hustle and drive and that level of technical competence that can come from various sources. You talked about it, it's multi-platform, it's a bunch of different things. It's how do you pull that together into building a career, and you've obviously done that.
Yeah, it's all about I guess your attitude to things. That makes you can learn anything if you're willing to pick up a manual or read through some code or just brute force this. I still regularly just try stuff until something works, and it's people oh, how did you do that? And it's I don't know, I just did stuff until it works. I just spent a couple
of hours brute force attacking it until it's hilarious. I look at how my daughter learned to play the piano. I picked a piano up off the side of the road. My daughter learns to play the piano. She then does a minor in college at music on the piano. She just brute force learned it during COVID without any physical lessons, just by watching videos on YouTube and just hacking at it. So, I mean, different skill, obviously, but it proves it can be done. So, I mean, I could talk to you for hours now. There's so much content here, but we've only got half an hour. Talk to me a little bit about where you see the mainframe security space in general. You're deep in the guts of it. You're working on an open source project around RACF. Where do you see I hear the phrase secure by obscurity. security via obscurity, and I think there's an element to that for the mainframe. Mark Wilson gave me a phrase years ago, the most securable platform. And I love that because it means that you've got to do work to secure it. Where do you see the state of the security landscape on the box?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, we have so many issues on the security side. Honestly, we have tooling that could be better, especially when we're talking CentOS. I can't talk about the mainframe operating systems I haven't touched, but on CentOS we have some tooling issues, some tools that could be better, analyzing stuff, just more user friendly. There's a lot of stuff that could be done there. So I would love to see improvements there, and I think we will see more and more people spinning up their own tools as we see more people joining the platform, because they're just going to be like, well, I don't want to use this, I want my own thing. So I've already seen a lot of people do that, not just myself. We also have a lot of issues on the skills issue, and by that I don't mean what a lot of people usually talk about, like, oh, we should teach people. Like, if it's not just that, it's if you have to secure CentOS, you need to be good at both Unix security principles and the old school RAG-if stuff, and that's a lot of stuff to know at once. But it's even more than that. That's just the ground principles, I guess. It's also very useful to know scripting languages and stuff, so you can automate things. So you need an insanely wide amount of skills to do this effectively, and I don't think there's that many people out there who really fits that bill. So it's very like split up into like multiple different teams, and we do need to combine those, because that's when you really start to understand the whole ecosystem. I've met a lot of people that only understand one corner, and they get so confused when it has to interact with the other, and that's not a rare thing. Like the Unix portion of the operating system, for example, that runs the TCP IP stack, there's compilers, there's all these like critical resources. So you can't just only understand all of the old stuff, you need to understand all of it. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. And I think over time that will just naturally get better with new people joining the platform, because people who have played around with Linux in their spare time or went to university or something like that, they've probably been introduced to Unix security principles, and they will just naturally have to learn all the other stuff as well.
So we've got to wrap up. As I say, I would love to come back and spend some more time. A couple of questions I always ask at the end of these sessions, and I'm really, really interested to ask this first question. You got a chance to go back to speak to 16-year-old Emma. And what would you say to her, given that you've wound forward now a few years? What advice would you give her?
That's tough, because I feel like...
Question, right? I've been asking it for 7 years. It's a great question.
I guess...
I think I'll answer for you. Do exactly what you're doing and just keep hacking at it. That, based on what my conversation with you, that's how I'd answer, but I'm fascinated to hear your answer.
Yeah, I do have one actually now that I think about it. Don't assume people will quickly be convinced of your ideas. Like that's definitely a challenge I had a few years ago. Like I assumed it would just be obvious that this new technology was great, but I quickly discovered that you need to address tons of different fears beforehand, and that's very difficult. I think everyone will stumble with this coming into this, especially in this space. Not to dog on anyone, but we do have a very high average age, and we're not that used to talking to people much younger. So I think everyone will stumble with that eventually. But yeah, I would tell her to be very prepared, prepare lots of PowerPoints, create like a general script before you do a whole sales pitch, because otherwise it's going to go off the rails, and everyone is just going to be like, what the fuck are they talking about? So you need to be prepared.
That's good advice. And then the final question, and I'm genuine. I've been asking this for 7 years, but I'm genuinely fascinated by your response to it. Where do you see the platform 5 years, 10 years from now?
I I think we're going to see more API-driven design and more infrastructure as code. I'm going to cross my fingers for it. I think it's an inevitability, but it'll be an uphill battle to get there.
I'd agree. Well, Emma, so I've been recording hundreds of these over the last few years. There's some of these that you get to your 15 minutes in and you're like, okay, I've got to muscle through the last 15 minutes of this. There's some of these that you wish could go on for hours. This has absolutely been one of those conversations. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So my name's Steven Dickens. You've been listening to the I'm a Mainframer podcast. My normal outro is go click subscribe and do all the things, but I'm going to also add, go check Emma out on LinkedIn. She is fascinating to engage with, and her take on where the mainframe's going is genuinely interesting. So do that as well, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mainframe Connect podcast and this episode in the I Am A Mainframer series, sponsored by Phoenix Software International and Vicom Infinity, a Converge company. Like what you heard? Subscribe to get every episode, or watch us online at openmainframeproject.org. Until next time, this is the Mainframe Connect podcast.